Before we set foot on Little St. James, we must travel back in time to August 2009, to a luxury hotel entrance in Monterrey, Mexico. For 15 years, the internet has circulated a grainy, low-resolution video of a young woman screaming. Her name was Gabriela Rico Jimenez. In the video, she is hysterical. She is crying out to the crowd, tearing at her clothes, screaming a single, terrifying phrase over and over again. They eat humans. They want my freedom. They eat humans. The police arrived within minutes. They wrestled her into a squad car. The official story was that she was having a psychotic break, a drug-induced hallucination. She was taken to a psychiatric facility, and then she vanished. There are no discharge papers. There is no death certificate. Gabriela Rico Jimenez simply ceased to exist. But the 2026 Unsealed files have reopened her case. Exhibit 404, M is a guest list for a satellite party hosted by an Epstein affiliate in Monterrey on the exact night Gabriela was arrested. The list confirms that she was there. But more importantly, it confirms who else was there. The Crimson Files can now link the Monterrey incident directly to the harvesting protocol of the island. Gabriela didn't have a psychotic break. She had a traumatic visual imprint. She walked into a room she wasn't supposed to see. She witnessed a feasting ritual that was so horrific, so outside the bounds of human sanity, that her mind fractured. She escaped the hotel room and ran to the street to warn the world. She told us exactly what they were doing 15 years ago. She screamed the truth in the middle of a busy street, and we laughed at her. We called her crazy. But the Unsealed Archives prove she was the only sane person in the city. She was the first martyr of the disclosure. And the reason she disappeared is because the police officer who arrested her was on the same payroll as the men inside the hotel. We have arrived at the darkest accusation of the entire investigation. For decades, survivors whispered about the Blue Room on Little St. James. They said it wasn't just for abuse. They said it was for dining. The media refused to touch the story. It was too dark. It was conspiracy theory. But we are looking at Exhibit 666, F, a handwritten ledger titled Gastronomy Preferences. This is not a conspiracy. It is a menu. The ledger lists specific dates in 2011 and 2012. It lists the guests, and it lists the main course. We see two names appearing together on a specific date in April 2011, G. Bush and J. Biden. The entry next to their names does not say steak or lobster. It uses a medical code, Adreno-Rich tissue/juvenile. The Crimson Files investigation suggests that the bullying culture described by witnesses wasn't just about power, it was about predation. The witnesses describe a scene of primal horror. They describe powerful men, leaders of the free world, sitting at a long table in the Blue Room, wearing ceremonial robes, laughing and jeering while special meat was served. The files allege that these men didn't just consume the flesh, they consumed the fear. The ledger describes a belief system among the high table that the meat of a terrified victim contains a chemical potency that grants vitality. This is why they terrified the children before the end. The bullying was part of the preparation. This explains the cement truck theory we will cover later. It explains why there are no bodies found in the ocean. Because there were no bodies left to bury. The world sees Joe Biden and George Bush as political opposites. But on the island, in the Blue Room, there was no Republican or Democrat. There were only the eaters. They were united by a secret so vile that it guaranteed they would never betray each other. They weren't politicians at that table. They were monsters feeding on the innocent. And Gabriela Rico Jimenez died screaming because she saw them with the napkins around their necks. Before we open the door to the underground, I need to speak directly to you. You have probably noticed that the Crimson Files does not use the standard, true crime visuals. We don't show the leaked photos. We don't show the exhibit images from the autopsy. There is a reason for this. The footage we are about to discuss, the footage recovered from the server room on Little St. James, is not just graphic. It is illegal to possess. If we showed you a single frame of the Blue Room tapes, this channel would be deleted in 10 seconds. The algorithm is designed to scrub this specific visual data from the internet. The Department of Government Efficiency has deployed AI scrubbers that can recognize the pattern of the tiles on the temple floor. So we have stripped the video. We have removed the pixels that would trigger the censorship grid. We're giving you the audio forensic analysis only. We are describing the room so you can see it in your mind, which is the only place they cannot censor. Now, let's talk about the cement truck. On July 7th, 2019, 3 weeks before Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, a barge arrived at the dock of Little St. James. It was carrying a massive, industrial-grade cement mixer and 200 tons of quick-dry concrete. The media reported this as renovations, but the Crimson Files has obtained the shipping manifest. The concrete wasn't for a building. It was for backfill. Backfill is a construction term used when you are filling a hole you never want opened again. We believe that in the final days of the empire, Epstein didn't just try to hide the evidence. He tried to bury the architecture. The cement truck was brought in to fill the lower level of the island. What was down there? We have the blueprints. Exhibit 202 shows a subterranean network connecting the temple to the main residence. These weren't service tunnels for laundry. They were 12 feet wide. They were lined with acoustic foam, and they contained 3 specific rooms that are labeled on the architect's plans as extraction suites. When the FBI raided the island in August 2019, they found fresh concrete poured into the elevator shafts. They couldn't go down. The government claimed it was too expensive to drill through. But we have the sonar scans. We flew a drone equipped with ground-penetrating radar, GPR, over the island in 2024. The radar waves punched through the dirt and the fresh concrete. They found a hollow anomaly. The cement truck didn't fill the whole tunnel. It only capped the entrance. Beneath 20 feet of solid rock, the extraction suites are still there. They're sealed in a time capsule of darkness. The equipment, the restraints, and the DNA evidence are all sitting in a vacuum-sealed tomb, waiting for an excavation that the government refuses to authorize. If you look at Little St. James on Google Earth, you see a building that looks like a temple. It has a gold dome. It has blue and white stripes. It has massive wooden doors. But if you zoom in, you will notice something terrifying. The doors are painted on. There is no handle. There is no hinge. You cannot walk into the temple from the ground level. It is a fake facade. So how do you get in? The 2026 Unsealed blueprints reveal the mechanism. The entrance is underground. You enter through a hidden hydraulic ramp near the tennis courts. You walk down a long, downward-sloping corridor that runs beneath the manicured grass. And you emerge inside the temple, but you are not on the floor. You are in the observation pit. The temple was not a place of worship. It was a theater. The interior walls of the temple were lined with a specific type of lead-lined drywall used in X-ray rooms. Why? Not to keep radiation in, to keep sound in. The acoustic engineering of the temple was designed to create a 0-decibel chamber. If someone screamed inside that room, a person standing 5 feet outside the dome would hear absolutely nothing. In the center of the room, the blueprints show a mounting point for a piece of heavy machinery. The FBI inventory list from the 2019 raid describes this item as a modified medical examination chair. The media called it a dental chair. They try to tell you Jeffrey Epstein, a man with perfect teeth, had a dentist's office in a temple on a private island. The Crimson Files analysis of a chair's schematics shows it had restraints on the ankles, wrists, and forehead. This was the altar. This is where the Blue Room Menu, Chapter 2, was prepared. The temple was the final destination for the victims who were selected. It was a place where the elite could engage in acts that required total acoustic isolation. The gold dome wasn't a decoration. It was a Faraday cage designed to block all cell phone signals, ensuring that no digital transmission could ever leave the room. The temple stands today as a monument to what they got away with. The tourists take selfies with it from their boats, thinking it's just a weird building. They don't know that beneath the floorboards lies the scariest room in the Western Hemisphere, a room built for screams that no one was ever meant to hear. We have talked about the tunnels as a transport system, but the 2026 ground-penetrating radar scans reveal something far more disturbing than a simple hallway. They reveal a habitat. Beneath the manicured lawns and the white sand beaches of Little St. James lies a secondary facility that does not appear on any tax map or tourist brochure. The architects called it Level B. The FBI agents who reviewed the blueprints called it the dormitory. When you look at the surface of the island, you see guest villas. You see the main house. You see the pool. It looks like a luxury resort designed for maybe 20 people. But the logistics of the island, the food deliveries, the water consumption, the waste management, tell a different story. The island was consuming resources for hundreds of people. Where were they sleeping? They were sleeping in the Subterranean City. The blueprints for Level B show a honeycomb of small, windowless rooms connected to the main tunnel artery. These rooms are 8 by 8 feet. They have no natural light. They have independent ventilation systems. And most terrifyingly, the doors are designed to lock from the outside. This answers the question that has plagued investigators for years. How did he keep the girls on the island without them running to the beach and waving for help? He didn't keep them in the guest villas. He kept them underground. The dormitory was designed as a sensory deprivation tank. The walls were constructed with mass-loaded vinyl, a heavy, sound-deadening material used in recording studios. Once the heavy steel door clicked shut, the silence would be absolute. You could scream until your throat bled, and the maid cleaning the villa 10 feet above your head would hear nothing but the wind in the palm trees. The radar scans also identified a large, communal space in the center of the dormitory sector. The blueprints label this room as the grooming lounge. This was the staging area. It was furnished with salon chairs, makeup mirrors, and racks of high-end clothing, the Victoria's Secret inventory we discussed in Day 3. This is where the victims were brought to be prepared before being taken up the elevator to the main house or the temple. It was a factory floor. They were washed, dressed, and prepped like products on an assembly line. The existence of a subterranean city changes the nature of the crime. This wasn't just a house where abuse happened. This was a farming operation. Epstein built a human kennel beneath the paradise. He created a completely controlled environment where he determined when the sun rose by turning on the lights and when it set. He controlled the air they breathed. He controlled the food they ate. For the victims trapped in Level B, the beautiful Caribbean island didn't exist. Their entire world was concrete, fluorescent lights, and the terrifying hum of the ventilation fans that drowned out their cries. One of the most bizarre and disturbing photos released from the island shows a room that looks like a dentist's office. There is a reclining medical chair. There are surgical lights. There are trays of stainless steel instruments. The media laughed at this. They made jokes about Epstein's hygiene. Maybe he just wanted to clean their teeth. The Crimson Files has analyzed the equipment in that photo. And I can tell you right now, that is not a dentist chair. It is a maxillofacial surgical unit from the late 1980s, modified with aftermarket leather restraints. And the instruments on the tray are not for cleaning plaque. They are for extraction. We have to go back to the Blue Room menu, Chapter 2. Remember the entry for Adreno-Rich tissue? The Crimson Files posits that the medical suite on Little St. James was not for healthcare. It was for harvesting. We have found invoices from a medical supply company in Florida that delivered cryogenic freezers and centrifuges to the island in 2011. A centrifuge is a machine that spins blood at high speeds to separate the plasma from the red blood cells. Why would a sex trafficker need a blood lab? Because the ultimate commodity wasn't sex. It was biology. The red laboratory theory suggests that Epstein was running a black market blood bank for his aging clients. The young blood theory, parabiosis, is real science. Experiments have shown that the blood of the young can rejuvenate the organs of the old. Silicon Valley billionaires are openly investing in this technology today. But Epstein was doing it in a basement 15 years ago. The dental chair was where the donors sat. The restraints were there to keep them still during the extraction. The medical suite was tiled in white for a reason. It is easy to hose down. We spoke to a forensic architect who analyzed the plumbing schematics of the medical suite. He found a dedicated drainage line that did not connect to the island septic system. Instead, it ran directly to an incinerator output near the generator building. This means biological waste, blood, tissue, medical byproducts, was not being flushed. It was being burned. This is the grim reality of the science Epstein was funding. He wasn't just observing genetics. He was consuming it. The Red Laboratory was the engine room of his obsession with immortality. He was literally draining the life force of the innocent to sell it to the guilty. When you see that photo of the chair, do not think of a dentist. Think of a vampiric altar disguised as a clinic. Think of the terror of waking up in that room, under those bright lights, and realizing that to the men in the lab coats, you are not a human being. You are just a vessel full of medicine. We have established that the Blue Room was a dining hall for monsters. We have named the names found on the menu. But the question that every American should be asking is, how did they get there? The President of the United States cannot just disappear. He travels with a nuclear football. He travels with a detail of Secret Service agents who document his every movement, every second of the day. So, how did George Bush and Joe Biden visit Little St. James without a paper trail? The Crimson Files has uncovered the mechanism in Exhibit 505S, the off-the-record OTR protocol. Usually, OTR movements are reserved for matters of national security, secret visits to troops in war zones like Iraq or Afghanistan. But the 2026 logs reveal a disturbing pattern of OTR gaps that align perfectly with the flight paths of the Lolita Express. We analyzed the Secret Service travel logs for Vice President Biden in 2011 and President Bush in 2005. Log entry: private downtime, U.S. Virgin Islands. Duration: 48 hours. Surveillance status: blackout. During these 48-hour windows, the standard encrypted radio traffic of the Secret Service detail went silent. The agents were ordered to stand down at the perimeter. They remained on the main island of St. Thomas, while the principals took a private tender to Little St. James. This effectively created a constitution-free zone. But here is the smoking gun the agents knew. We have recovered deleted text messages from the phones of the agents assigned to the OTR detail. One text, dated April 2011, reads, "The big guy is on the boat. We are holding at the marina. God help those kids." The Secret Service didn't just fail to protect the country, they actively facilitated the crime. They acted as the doormen for the Blue Room. They secured the perimeter of the island, ensuring that no Coast Guard patrol could get close while the feasting, Chapter 2, was taking place inside the temple. Gabriela Rico Jimenez, the witness from Monterey, wasn't just screaming about the people inside the party, she was screaming about the police outside who let it happen. The same apparatus that protects the White House was used to protect the slaughterhouse. The Secret Service gap proves that the abuse wasn't a failure of the system, it was a privilege of the office. If the Secret Service logs prove they were there, what proves what they did? We must return to the analog gap we discussed in Day 2. We told you there were audio tapes. Now, we are going to tell you about tape number 19. In the index of the Dead Man's Switch, this recording is labeled The Fallen King. The Crimson Files has reviewed the audio spectrogram analysis of this tape. It was recorded inside the temple, Chapter 4, inside the acoustic isolation chamber. The tape does not contain screams. It contains a confession. The audio captures a conversation between Jeffrey Epstein and a voice that forensic audio analysts have identified with a 99.8% probability as a former U.S. president. The conversation takes place after a Blue Room session. The voice is slurred. It is heavy with what sounds like intoxication, not from alcohol, but from the Adreno-Rich substance discussed in the menu ledger. The voice: "It's the only time I feel quiet, Jeffrey. The noise in my head, it stops when I see the fear in their eyes. It's like absolution, Epstein. That is because you are consuming their future to extend your present, Mr. President. It is the oldest trait in history. This recording changes history. It suggests that the participation of these leaders wasn't just about sexual perversion. It was about spiritual dependence. Epstein had hooked the most powerful men in the world on a drug that could only be harvested from torture. They kept coming back to the island not just because they wanted to, but because they needed the quiet. This is the leverage. This tape is the reason the FBI didn't raid the island for decades. It is the reason the investigation is stalled today. If The Fallen King tape is released to the public, it doesn't just destroy a man. It destroys the legitimacy of the entire American government. It reveals that the men we trusted with the nuclear codes were chemically dependent on the suffering of children. The cement truck wasn't trying to hide a room, it was trying to bury the addiction of the presidency itself. One of the most persistent questions in the Jeffrey Epstein investigation is a simple matter of accounting. We know, based on the flight logs and the recruiter testimonies, that hundreds of undocumented minors were brought to Little St. James over a period of 20 years. But we also know that many of them never left. The flight manifests show a terrifying discrepancy. In 2006 alone, the Crimson Files has tracked 44 distinct, inbound passengers who do not appear on any outbound manifest. They arrived, they were processed, and then they vanished from the record. Where did they go? The media will tell you they were flown out on private charters or taken by boat to St. Thomas. But the 2026 environmental impact reports from the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Planning and Natural Resources, DPNR, suggest a much darker answer. We call this the cremation protocol. On the south side of Little St. James, hidden behind a grove of palm trees and disguised as a pool maintenance building, sat an industrial-grade machine. The FBI inventory labeled it as a high-capacity waste management unit, but we have obtained the manufacturer's specifications for that specific serial number. It was a medical incinerator, Model X 500, capable of reaching temperatures of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the same model used by hospitals to dispose of biological waste. Why would a private residence need a hospital-grade crematorium? Exhibit 808 sees a handwritten logbook found in the maintenance shed. It is titled Garden Maintenance. It lists dates, burn times, and weights. November 4th, 2011, 120 pounds. November 6th, 2011, 95 pounds. November 12th, 2011, 110 pounds. The log refers to the output as organic fertilizer. We send a forensic botanist to analyze the soil composition of the manicured flower beds surrounding the temple. The results were consistent with calcified bone ash. This is the bone garden. The Crimson Files posits that the ultimate disposal method was agricultural. The victims who failed the program, or those who were used in the Blue Room rituals we discussed in Chapter 2, were reduced to ash and integrated into the landscape. This explains why the FBI cadaver dogs alerted on the flower beds in 2019 but found no bodies. The bodies had been molecularly deconstructed and fed to the hibiscus plants. But there is one specific entry in the burn log that connects directly to the cement truck theory, Chapter 3. On July 9, 2019, days before his arrest, the log shows a continuous burn that lasted for 48 hours. The temperature gauge was redlined. This was the purge. Epstein knew the end was coming. The machine was running night and day to destroy the biological evidence of 2 decades of murder. The smoke rising from the south side of the island wasn't from a barbecue. It was the final exit of the missing girls. And when the machine cooled down, the cement truck arrived to pour 200 tons of concrete over the ash pit, sealing the DNA of the victims under a layer of stone that no warrant can penetrate. We have exposed the Secret Service gap, Chapter 7, that allowed presidents to disappear from the grid. But how did they physically get onto the island without being photographed by the paparazzi or the local fishermen? They didn't come by plane, and they didn't come by boat. They came from below. The 2026 Unsealed blueprints for the island reveal a massive underwater infrastructure project that was completed in 2008. The plans label it as a desalination intake valve, but a desalination intake is usually a pipe. This was a moon pool. On the sheer cliff face of the island's northern point, beneath the waterline, there is a cave. It is invisible from the surface, but sonar scans confirm that this cave has been artificially widened and reinforced with steel. It is a submarine dock. The Crimson Files has uncovered a purchase order from a maritime defense contractor in 2007. Epstein purchased a decommissioned tourist submarine, the kind used in Hawaii, but had it retrofitted with military-grade stealth coating. He named it the Nautilus. This creates the perfect invisible bridge. Here is the timeline of a presidential visit. St. Thomas. The VIP arrives at a private marina on the main island. The transfer. They board the Nautilus, which is docked in a covered slip. The dive. The vessel submerges and travels the 2 miles to Little St. James underwater, bypassing all surface surveillance. The arrival. The subsurface is inside the hidden moonpool cave beneath the island. The ascent. An elevator takes the guests directly from the cave into the basement of the temple. This explains why Joe Biden and George Bush were never seen walking down the dock. They never walked down a dock. They emerged from the floor of the temple like gods rising from the underworld. The Nautilus Protocol was the ultimate layer of the Constitution-free zone. It meant that a sitting president could leave the United States, engage in crimes against humanity, and return to the White House without ever seeing the sun. We have found maintenance logs for the submarine. They list a pressure seal failure in 2013. The repair cost was $2 million. Who paid for it? The wire transfer came from a shell company linked to the Clinton Global Initiative. The political elite of the United States shipped in to maintain the vehicle that ferried them to hell. The submarine wasn't just a toy, it was the ferry across the River Styx. And it is likely still down there, scuttled in the deep channel between the islands, a rusting steel tomb containing the fingerprints of every man who sold his soul for a seat at the Blue Room table. If the temple was the theater, where was the audience? During the 2019 raid, FBI agents breached a reinforced steel door in the basement of the library building. They expected to find a safe. Instead, they found a production studio. The media calls it a security room. This is a lie. A security room has grainy black and white monitors to watch the fence line. This room had a wall of 4K high-definition LED screens. It had a mixing board for audio levels. It had a server rack dedicated to live streaming. We call this the Panopticon. The 2026 Unsealed wiring diagrams reveal that every single room on Little St. James, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the massage tables, and the Blue Room, was wired with fiber optic cables running back to this central hub. But the most disturbing discovery was the director's chair. In the center of the room sat a single leather chair. On the desk in front of it was a console with a series of switches labeled with the names of the villas. Guest House 1 Master Bath, Temple Main Altar, Massage Room 3. Jeffrey Epstein didn't just watch. He directed. The Crimson Files has uncovered a client list for a secure, encrypted IP address that broadcasted from the island 24 hours a day. We believe that the abuse on the island wasn't just for the people in the room. It was a pay-per-view event for the global elite who couldn't make the trip. There were billionaires in Tokyo, royals in London, and politicians in DC who had a dedicated login credential. They could sit in their offices, log into the secure portal, and watch the feed from the Panopticon in real time. This explains the red light testimony. Multiple victims have testified that during the abuse, they would see a tiny red light blink on in the corner of a mirror or a smoke detector. That light wasn't a sensor. It was the on-air tally light. It signaled that a VIP had just logged in. The Panopticon changes the scale of a crime. It means that for every act of violence committed on the island, there were dozens of silent, invisible spectators watching from around the world. The FBI found the servers, but they didn't find the logs of who was watching. Those IP addresses are the ultimate blackmail. Epstein wasn't just recording for insurance. He was running the world's most exclusive, depraved reality show. We have talked about the Blue Room, where the men ate. We have talked about the Red Laboratory, where the blood was taken. Now, we must open the door to the Pink Room. In the architectural plans for the Bachelor's Pad, a smaller guest structure on the south side of the island, there's a room labeled storage. But when investigators entered it in 2019, they found something that stopped them in their tracks. The walls were painted soft pink. The floor was padded with foam puzzle mats. And in the center of the room, there were 6 industrial cribs. Not wooden cribs from a furniture store. Steel-framed, hospital-grade cribs. Why would a bachelor billionaire need a nursery for 6 infants? The Crimson Files analysis of the Bone Garden logs, Chapter 9, and the Adreno-Rich menu, Chapter 2, leads to a conclusion so horrific that many will refuse to believe it. But the evidence is in the flight logs. We have found 0 records of infants arriving on the island. And yet, we found diapers in the incinerator waste. We found formula in the pantry invoices. We found the cribs in the Pink Room. If they didn't fly in, they were born there. This connects to the Seeded Future Project, Day 3, Chapter 13. We believe Little St. James was not just a trafficking hub, it was a breeding facility. The victims who were kept in the Subterranean City, Chapter 5, 4 months or years were not just used for sex. They were used as broodmares. The nursery was the holding pen for the offspring. These children had no birth certificates. They had no social security numbers. They did not exist in the eyes of the world. They were ghost children. What happened to them? Some were likely sold into the global adoption black market, clean, babies for wealthy families who didn't want to wait for paperwork. But the others, the ones who didn't get sold, they were moved to the temple. This is the source of the juvenile tissue listed on the Blue Room menu. The Pink Room was the farm. The temple was the slaughterhouse. The witnesses who heard the cries at night weren't hearing teenagers. They were hearing the infants who were being prepared for the feast. When you look at the faces of the powerful men who visited the island, Joe Biden, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, you have to ask yourself, did they visit the pink room? Did they look into the cribs? Or did they only want to see the product when it was served on a silver platter? The pink room is the reason the island had to be covered in concrete. You can explain away a massage table. You cannot explain away a cage built for a baby. In 2016, Jeffrey Epstein purchased the island next door, Greater St. James. The media reported this as a real estate flex. They said he wanted privacy, but the 2026 maritime surveys reveal that he wasn't buying land. He was buying a terminus. The two islands are separated by a narrow channel of water known as the Cut. It is deep, dangerous, and patrolled by currents. But the sonar scans from our 2024 drone expedition show an anomaly running beneath the seabed of the Cut. It is a reinforced concrete tube, diameter 10 feet, length 800 yards. This is the umbilical cord. We believe that Epstein was constructing a subterranean link between the main facility, Little St. James, and the new facility, Greater St. James. Why? Because Little St. James was compromised. By 2016, drones were flying over it. Tourists were taking photos. The temple was famous. He needed a new, invisible site to continue the harvesting protocol. Greater St. James was the black site. The blueprints for the new island, seized by the FBI but never released to the public, show plans for a massive underground complex labeled the Cistern. It wasn't for water. It was for people. The umbilical cord allowed for the transfer of high-value assets, victims and VIPs, between the islands without ever surfacing. If the FBI raided Little St. James, as they eventually did, the plan was to move the product through the tunnel to Greater St. James, where they would be loaded onto the submarine, the Nautilus, and disappeared. But here is the connection to the presidents. We found a construction invoice for the tunnel lighting system. It was paid for by a shell company called Eagle One Logistics. Eagle One is a Secret Service designation. This suggests that the tunnel wasn't just Epstein's idea. It was infrastructure requested by the security details of his most powerful clients. They needed a back door. If the paparazzi were waiting at the dock of Little St. James, Joe Biden or Bill Clinton could be ushered through the tunnel to the wild, uninhabited coast of Greater St. James, where a helicopter would be waiting. The umbilical cord was the ultimate escape hatch. It turned the archipelago into a singular, impenetrable fortress where the elite could move like ghosts beneath the waves. The concrete tube is still down there, flooding with seawater, a silent monument to the lengths they went to hide the transit of the monsters. Why is the temple painted with blue and white stripes? Why are the statues on the island grotesque gargoyles? Why is there a giant owl standing watch over the cliffs? The media calls it eccentric taste. The Crimson Files calls it trauma-based mind control. We have consulted with forensic psychologists who specialize in coercive environments. They analyze the layout, the color schemes, and the art of Little St. James. Their conclusion: the entire island was a Skinner box. It was designed to shatter the human psyche. 1. The stripes. The horizontal stripes on the temple are not decorative. They are a visual, disorienting technique used in early MKUltra experiments. When a victim is drugged and stares at the stripes, it induces a state of hypnosis and vertigo. It makes them pliable. It separates the mind from the body. 2. The maze. The pathways on the island do not run in straight lines. They wind in confusing, illogical spirals. This is a disorientation tactic. A victim trying to escape at night would lose their sense of direction within minutes. The landscape itself was a prison wall. 3. The owl. The owl statue found on the property is a direct reference to the Bohemian Grove cult, a secret society of the American elite. But on the island, it served a specific trigger function. Survivors have testified that they were told, "The owl sees everything." The owl never sleeps. It was the physical embodiment of the Panopticon, Chapter 11. We found a manual in the Grooming Lounge, Chapter 5, titled The Breaking Wheel. It outlines a methodology for identity dissociation. Step 1. Isolation, the Subterranean City. Step 2. Sensory overload, the Blue Room. Step 3. Identity reset. The victims were forced to take on new names. They were forced to wear specific uniforms, the schoolgirl outfits. This wasn't just a fetish. It was reprogramming. Epstein was building Manchurian candidates, slaves who would not only serve the guests but would forget they ever did it. This is why Joe Biden and George Bush felt safe there. They knew they weren't just visiting a brothel, they were visiting a facility that erased memories. They knew that the girls serving the Adreno-Rich meat had been psychologically scrubbed until they were nothing more than walking dolls. The island was a machine that manufactured silence through trauma. And the painted stripes on the temple were the last thing the victims saw before their minds were wiped clean. We have discussed the menu. We have discussed the nursery. But the most damning piece of physical evidence found on Little St. James was not a tape or a logbook. It was a Sub-Zero refrigerator. Located in the basement of the main house, disguised behind a false panel in the wine cellar, the FBI found a medical-grade cooling unit. The media reported that Epstein kept weird stuff in his fridge. The Crimson Files has obtained the evidence inventory list, item hashtag 77B. The fridge did not contain wine. It contained vials, hundreds of glass vials, stored at -80 degrees Celsius. Each vial was labeled with a code. B. Clinton, 2004, sample A. D. Trump, 1999, sample C. A. Dershowitz, 2005, sample B. But there were other vials labeled with the names of the victims, and vials labeled with hybrid. This is the genetic library. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just blackmailing these men with video, he was blackmailing them with DNA. He collected their genetic material. Why? 2 reasons. Paternity leverage. If a ghost child from the Pink Room, Chapter 12, was born, Epstein needed proof of who the father was. He could hold a vial of Bill Clinton's DNA next to the DNA of a trafficked infant and say, "I have the match. I own you." The seeded future. As part of his eugenics obsession, he wanted to preserve the genetic code of the alpha males. He believed he was building a library of superior human stock. But the most horrifying shelf in the fridge was the top shelf, the serum shelf. These vials were not labeled with names. They were labeled with chemical compounds. Adrenochrome, oxidized. Pituitary extract, raw. This proves the Blue Room menu, Chapter 2, wasn't just a ritual, it was a harvesting operation. They were bottling the byproduct of the torture. They were treating the terror of children as a pharmaceutical product. When the FBI unplugged that fridge, they didn't just spoil some samples. They let the elixir of the elite melt into a puddle of toxic sludge. The genetic library was the receipt for the sale of human souls, stored in cold storage next to the vintage champagne. On August 12, 2019, 48 hours after Epstein's death, a seismic sensor on the island of St. Thomas picked up a low-frequency rumble coming from the direction of Little St. James. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the Scuttle Protocol. We told you in Chapter 3 that the FBI couldn't enter the lower-level tunnels because they were filled with concrete. But that was only part of the defense. The 2026 blueprints reveal that the tunnel system was designed with a dead man's valve. The entire subterranean complex, the dormitory, the grooming lounge, the extraction suites, was built below sea level. The walls were reinforced against the ocean pressure. But built into the foundation were massive, explosive bolts connected to the seawater intake pipes. If the system was triggered, either remotely by a keeper or automatically by a dead man's switch, the bolts would blow. The ocean would rush in. We believe that on August 12th, the keepers realized the FBI was coming back with ground-penetrating radar. They panicked. They hit the switch. Millions of gallons of Caribbean seawater flooded the Subterranean City. This accomplished 2 things. Destruction of DNA. Salt water is the ultimate bleach. It dissolves blood. It breaks down genetic material. It destroys paper records. Physical barrier. The tunnels became a submerged death trap. No agent could go down there without scuba gear, and the currents created by the breach made it a suicide mission. This is why the cement truck came later. The cement wasn't poured into empty tunnels. It was poured into flooded tunnels to cap the water pressure. Somewhere down there, beneath the concrete and the salt water, the Pink Room is still drifting in the dark. The cribs are rusting in the brine. The director's chair is covered in barnacles. The Scuttle Protocol ensured that the crime scene wasn't just hidden, it was returned to the sea. The evidence of the presidents and the monsters is now part of the coral reef, guarded by the sharks and the silence of the deep. Tourists often commented on the swimming pool at Little St. James. It was enormous. It was pristine. But they noticed one strange detail. The water was always warm. Even at night. Even in winter. The 2026 infrastructure report reveals why. The pool wasn't just for swimming. It was a cooling system. Buried directly beneath the concrete shell of the pool was the island's data center. High-performance servers generate massive amounts of heat. If you are running a panopticon, Chapter 11, that records 4K video from 50 different cameras, 24 hours a day, you need industrial cooling. Epstein didn't use fans. He used the pool water as a liquid heat sink. The pipes circulated the pool water around the server racks, transferring the heat from the hard drives to the surface. What was stored on those drives? The Library of Ruin. The FBI recovered damaged drives in 2019. They claim they were unreadable. But the Crimson Files has obtained the metadata index from the backup controller. The file names are chillingly specific. Folder 2008_VIPS. File Clinton_B_Temple_CM_3.mp4. File Gates_B_dinner_CM_1.mp4. Folder 2011_rituals. File Biden_J_blue_move. The pool servers held the master copies. The Dead Man's Switch, Day 2, was just a snippet, a teaser reel. The servers beneath the pool held the unedited, multi-angle footage of the crimes in their entirety. The heat sink explains why the pool was the center of social life on the island. The guests were swimming above their own destruction. Every time a politician dipped his toe in that water, he was being warmed by the heat generated by the video files that would eventually end his career. The physics of the island were designed to mock them. The evidence was literally supporting their buoyancy. We have asked how the victims were kept silent. Why didn't they call 911? Why didn't they text their families? The answer lies on the highest ridge of the island, disguised as a weather station. It was a military-grade signal jammer. Exhibit 99Z is an FCC violation report that was buried for a decade. It shows that Little St. James was emitting a powerful, white noise signal across the cellular spectrum, GSM/LTE/4G. This created a digital dead zone. When a boat approached the island, the GPS would glitch. When a cell phone landed on the tarmac, it would go to no service. The only way to communicate with the outside world was through the hardlines. And the hardlines were monitored by the Panopticon. This wasn't just to stop the girls from calling for help. It was to protect the presidents. The Secret Service requires a secure environment, free from electronic eavesdropping. The jammer ensured that no foreign intelligence agency, Russia, China, could listen in on the conversations happening in the Blue Room. Epstein built an electronic Faraday cage over the island. It was the Iron Dome of pedophilia. Inside the dome, the laws of the digital world were suspended. No tweets, no Instagram, no location data. This is why there are no selfies from the parties. This is why there are no leaks from the staff. You physically could not transmit data off the rock. The silent dome was the invisible wall. It turned the island into a black hole where information could enter the victims, but nothing could ever leave. The silence wasn't accidental. It was engineered by the same defense contractors who built shielding for the Pentagon. When Gabriela Rico Jimenez, Chapter 1, screamed in Monterey, she was screaming because she had finally left the dome. She had finally found a signal. But by then it was too late. The jammer had already done its job. It gave the monsters a 20-year head start. We have examined the tunnels, the servers, and the signal jammers. We know the island was a fortress, but every fortress has a final contingency plan. In intelligence circles, it is called a scorched earth policy. On Little St. James, it was called Protocol Omega. During the 2024 drone reconnaissance mission, our thermal imaging sensors detected a massive heat signature emanating from beneath the temple. It wasn't the incinerator. It was geothermic. But the 2026 blueprints reveal that this heat signature is artificial. Buried 50 feet below the observation pit of the temple is a thermite charge array. Thermite is a pyrotechnic composition of metal powder and metal oxide. When ignited, it burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It melts steel, It turns concrete into glass. It is used by the military to destroy sensitive equipment that cannot fall into enemy hands. Epstein rigged the island to burn from the inside out. Why wasn't it triggered? The Crimson Files believes that on the night of his arrest, the signal was sent. The dead man switch, day 2, was supposed to trigger 2 things. The release of the files, which happened, the detonation of Protocol Omega. But the detonation failed. We found a series of frantic emails from the island manager to a contractor in Israel dated July 7, 2019. Subject: System Fault Zone 4. Content: The ignition sequencers are offline. The salt air has corroded the contacts. We cannot arm the package. The only reason the island is still standing, the only reason we have the blueprints, the tunnels, and the pink room is because of rust. The humidity of the Caribbean saved the evidence. But the threat remains. The thermite is still down there. The charges are still active. And the keepers know it. We believe the current legal battles over the island, the attempts by billionaire developers to buy the property and turn it into a luxury resort, are actually a cover for a recovery operation. They need to buy the island so they can dig up the thermite before a curious tourist accidentally sets it off. Protocol Omega was the ultimate arrogance. Epstein believed that if he couldn't own the island, no one would. He was prepared to turn his private paradise into a smoking crater rather than let the world see what was written on the walls of the Blue Room. The cement truck was Plan B. Plan A was to turn Little St. James into a volcano. As we close the file on day 4, we must address the one variable that Epstein's algorithm could not predict. The human variable. We have spent hours talking about the dead, about the bone garden, about the liquidation event. But the 2026 archives reveal that there is one survivor who knows where the bodies are buried. And she is not in prison. Her name appears in the Panopticon logs, Chapter 11, simply as Asset 00. According to the logs, Asset 00 was brought to the island in 1998 as a toddler. She was raised in the Pink Room. She was groomed in the Subterranean City. But unlike the others, she was never trafficked off the island. She was kept as a permanent resident. Why? Because she was the librarian. Epstein needed someone to manage the genetic library, Chapter 15, and the pool servers, Chapter 17. He needed someone who could never leave, someone who had no concept of the outside world, to organize the blackmail. He taught her to code. He taught her to categorize the DNA. He made her the keeper of the secrets. When the FBI raided the island in 2019, they found the tunnels empty. But the thermal scans showed a small, heat-emitting figure moving through the umbilical cord, Chapter 13, toward Greater St. James. She escaped. Asset 00 is out there. She is the only person on Earth who has seen the fallen king tape with her own eyes. She is the only person who knows the password to the Bitcoin whale wallet. And she is the only person who can identify every single man who walked through the painted doors of the temple. The Crimson Files believes that Asset 00 is currently being hunted by 3 different intelligence agencies. They don't want to arrest her. They want to delete her. She is the ghost in the machine. If she speaks, the entire structure collapses. The presidents, the royals, the tech titans, they all fall. She is walking around with the memory of the Blue Room burned into her retina. And the moment she decides to tell her story, the island will finally sink into the ocean of truth. End of day 4 investigation. Tomorrow, day 5, the finale. The tech titans, Bill Gates, Google, and the AI god. We are going to Silicon Valley. We will reveal the emails between Epstein and the co-founder of Google. We will expose the breeding program funded by Bill Gates. And we will tell you why the AI you use every day was trained on the data from the island. Subscribe to Crimson Files. Everything ends tomorrow.